Hello again, welcome back to Kaleidopod, and it's September, and normally I would record these some weeks in advance, but because I've been away and because I've had the very busy 35th anniversary celebrations in August, I'm recording this a little bit later. So if you find the editing slightly ropey, please don't blame me, as it were. We're just doing the best we can at short notice. Today is a special about the TV series Callan. Why am I doing a special about the TV series Callan, you may ask? Because you would have thought that you could see or hear every second of Callan out on DVD, particularly the Australian box set from Vision, which is fantastic, and I would recommend it to you. Well, it's partly a tribute to some friends today, because none of this would happen today without the fantastic work done by Anthony Goodman and Matthew Morgenstern, who collated this material many, many years ago. Now, Matthew Morgenstern, perhaps some of you will know or won't know, he now lives in Israel, and I recently met him for the very first time, actually, at the Kaleidoscope event at the BFI, and he was telling me how much he still got about Callan. But many, many years ago, Anthony Goodman and him decided to write the definitive book on Callan. It never got written, but they were recording interviews at a time with so many people who have now passed away, and so therefore you'll never get them on tape again. So these memories are unique and priceless. Now, the whole project went slightly sour because Anthony Goodman, who was a bit of a prankster at times, decided to call himself Roger Barrett one day and cause a few bit of a hoo-ha in Doctor Who circles. Now, for some people, that means he's like, the Antichrist, and they want to never talk about Anthony Goodman ever again. Well, I think that's completely wrong, and I'm going to say that on the record now. The Anthony Goodman I knew was a kind and generous man. He was a really decent guy, and he was a passionate fan of Callan, and I have to say, a really good friend to Kaleidoscope. I don't quite know why people decide to play the odd practical joke on other people or not, but if they do, they do. All of us have done things wrong in our time. I'm one of the biggest sinners you can probably imagine. Though other people might disagree with that, but in my own heart, I think I've done wrong in the past, and I hope that people can forgive me for that and move on, because just because you've done something wrong 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, doesn't mean you should be judged for it now, as it were. So this whole podcast is dedicated to Anthony Goodman's memory, and I hope that maybe Matthew will play this to Anthony's mum one day, because I think she's still alive, and she'll realise that for many of us, we still hold Anthony in very high esteem, and the work of Anthony and Matthew on the subject of Callan, I think, has not been beaten yet by anybody else. So I'm going to play some more extracts here from different interviews done with people over the years, and I am really hoping that you get some good insight into these. So you're going to hear interviews with lots of different people. I think probably the easiest place to start is actually starting with Edward Woodward himself. And here he is talking about how he got the role of Callan.
About 18 months, year before the Callan series started, or not the Callan series, the play, the one-off play, I had about 6 months, which was pretty rotten. And then I started doing very well, and I started getting a lot of television, which was great. And I was going to go on holiday. which was one of the first holidays we'd had for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. And take the whole family off to Spain. And I was due to go the end of the 1 week, and I think it was the Monday morning of the week before I was due to go. My agent phoned me up and said there is a television play called Magnum for Schneider, which ABC, as it then was, has called about. And I said, forget it, because, and when is it? And they said, well, it would cut towards the end of your holiday. And I said, no, forget it. If I ever got me out, we've got to have this whole one. Well, I was living in Twickenham at the time, and just around the corner from ABC Studios. And so the casting director, with great intelligence, put the script through the letterbox, working on the premise that if a script arrives on an actor's doormat, you have to read it. She'd already said to Janet or to Eric that this was a marvelous part, and that I'm sure I wouldn't say no to it. So she was determined to make sure that I read it. Well, I picked it up and I read it, and I knew straight away that I had to do this part. So I had to cancel the holiday, and family, most upset with me for about 6 months. I had the feeling right at the very beginning. In fact, I was more certain about that armchair theatre play. It was only to that time anything I'd ever done before. I was certain that it would spin off into a series, and I thought that if this does work in a series, if this is made into a series, it will be successful. And it was with one of the first scripts that I've read where I had that kind of feeling.
But what stage did you realise the series was going to go ahead?
Well, it was talked of whilst we were in rehearsing, and then of course there was always a gap between actually putting it in the can and it going out, and it was more talk, desperately talking about it. And then when it went out, it had quite an impact, and then people from ABC, called up and said, look, why don't we get together and talk about this? We're thinking of doing a trial 6. So that was really fairly soon after, within about 3 or 4 months after it went out. And that's what we did, and we did 6 to start with.
From the first script, what impression did you get of Caleb as a person?
You have to understand in the context of television at that time, it was a very exciting time in television. There were still live television, live drama. Others not a lot, but there was still live drama. They were moving out of the as to a format television series and reaching out. It really was the first of the anti-hero, non-heroes, whatever you want to call it. And it really kind of led the way, as armchair theatre did many times, and of course it was history. And the thing that appealed to me about the character was that he was such a he had a chippery show, and he was a sort of anti-hero, and he was a hero with the feet of clay, and he was a prickly kind of person. I was very much looking for that kind of character to play. I got tired of playing either crooks or heroes. This man went right down the middle. You couldn't make up your mind what he was, and nor could he. And therefore, it was one of the very first characters that I had read, thinking in terms of a television series, that people would either take to him or they would just dismiss it totally. So it was quite a big chance to take for the television company at the time. And it worked extremely well on its first running, and then picked it up again for, I think we did 15 the next time.
What characteristics did you try to bring out?
Well, it was one of those few scripts that I'd come across there, where it was there, the man was there. I mean, James Bishop had written this man so precisely and so extremely well. It just literally came off the page, and you learn the lines and just fell into the character, and it's all free. The really good scripts, I think, always are those in which you never know, the audience never know how much the actor has brought, how much the author has brought, how much the director has brought to it. So, I mean, basically, it was a question of making the character come off the page and live. There were obviously, as time went by, I introduced certain aspects and attitudes of the character which you have to do in a television series otherwise, because that keeps it alive for you, and I always believe it keeps it alive for an audience. For instance, one of the things was that he was absolutely first class with the gun. So therefore, I mean, I knew I had to be able to take a gun to pieces, a handgun to pieces in the dark, if necessary. In fact, I did practice in the dark, taking it to pieces and putting it back together again. And I remember during the course of doing this, that I got to hate that damn gun, and I thought, this is interesting. We're a man who actually hates guns and yet is a killer and uses guns all the time. And so one introduced that into, I suggested that to Jim. He said, great idea, and wrote it in one episode, which then it continued whenever we wanted to use it. It kind of continued into the life of the man. But then over the period of time, I think we only did 42 in I don't know how many years.
Yes, and so since it.
And it's strange to think, but here I'm doing this The Equalizer, and here I'm just about to start again next week. And at the end of this year, or next year, March, I finished March 88, God willing, I will have done 66 in basically 18 months of work. And we did, I think it was, including the armchair theatre, 42 in Callan over 7 years, strange thought.
Did you see the character of Caleb as having any audience appeal?
Well, you have to work from the premise that if you're excited by a role, you have to work on the premise that yes, that all things being equal, the audience will see, will be excited by the role as you are. Will see in the character and whole ethos what you have seen. In terms of actually television, of course, especially independent television or commercial television, you have to hope that it's going to be in a number, a big enough number. I must say, I mean, I thought it would be reasonably successful, but I didn't realise that it would be as successful as it was. That was something that was quite astonishing to me.
How much of Edward Wood was there in Callan?
Well, I suppose really quite a lot. I mean, as an actor, you always bring a lot of yourself to every character you play. Some characters lend themselves very much for the actor to bring what is hidden in the actor quite a lot. I mean, the aggression that I put into Callan was very much my hidden aggression, my anger, which very rarely shows its ugly head. My fear of he was always afraid of making a bit of a fool of himself, and I always had that. I think only children quite often have that. And actors certainly do, because the worst thing of all is stripping yourself bare, as it were, when you're rehearsing, So quite a lot of parts of me, and certainly the anger was brought to that character. I mean, it was there, but I mean, I filled in and enlarged it to a certain extent.
And going through some of the other actors, of course, who were so instrumental in making this series a success, This is Russell Hunter talking about his role as Lonely and kind of explaining how the character evolved and how the role of Lonely changed in the series over time.
What were your feelings on the earlier episodes? The very early ones with Ronald Rad.
The ones with Ronald Rad, I think, were Easter's best. I liked those most of all. Mark, you have to say immediately that I was a great admirer of late Ronnie Rad. I thought he brought an authority to it which no one else ever did. And he was a lovely man to work with, and a funny man to work with, but also there was a reality about his performance, which I don't think anybody else quite got. Simply because he altered the character a little bit when he died.
What do you think it was about the performance that made it so real?
But Ronnie,
Yeah.
simply because he brought to the character of Hunter a quality of he was possibly less well placed than the other Hunters. He was possibly, by his accent, less well educated. But by God, he looked as if he was better fed and better wined and dined and had a lot more experience of life. And had a lot more experience of being a little bit like Callan himself, maybe in his younger days. There was an element of knowing what made Callan tick, which I don't think anybody else has quite got.
How would you describe the character of Logan himself?
You mean from my point of view, or from Callan's point of view, or?
Well, first from your point of view.
I just like the character. It seemed to me, I think it's one of the things that Jimmy Mitchell ever wrote was lonely is lonely is lonely. I mean, he's just there and that's it. And I believed in him totally. I found him absolutely believable, not only to read about in the novels, but certainly in the very early scripts. Totally believable. Because of the language he was given and his reaction to situation. Enjoyed him very much.
Did Lonely change much over the years?
Yes, I think it did. I think the writing changed. Maybe I changed my performance too, but I think he got a bit glib. I think, in a bit of difficulty, bring in Lonely and make a joke about bathing and washing and all the rest of it, and the smell. I think originally, Lonely's expertise as a burglar, and particularly his expertise in just going to bed, disappearing, so that people who were looking at, who were following him, passed him and didn't even recognize him. I think that was terribly important. That Lonely was a wonderful, very good at disappearing when he wanted to disappear. And, I mean, Callan, I think in the early episodes, several times remarks, what did it? I can make it out. You followed him, did you? Well, if you did, you're the best in the world if you managed to keep him, because nobody can follow him. I mean, he was just a little animal. And I think that was lost later on. He was put into the wrong situation. I don't think he should have met some of the people he met. I think he was used as a kind of social joke, which was probably legitimate, but let's say I would have approved more if he had been more carefully handled. He was probably better when he was a very small part character within the story.
Who could possibly forget, of course, that through virtually the entire, or several series of both black and white and colour episodes, Lisa Langdon played Liz, the secretary to Hunter, and she's certainly someone who hasn't done many interviews in her time, but here she is talking about how her role was envisaged, how it changed over time, and how she created the role of Lisa.
I had an agent at the time who, it was Morgan Liz Williams, and he said, they need someone to do a voice for this thing. Go down there. So I went down there and did this voice. And And that's sort of, then in the next series I decided to put the in, presumably because there was the sort of part in the original book, or was it an original book? No, that I play. And B, because I think they were a little short of females. We probably needed someone with sort of long blonde hair, but not too overdone. That was quite funny because to begin with, they didn't realise that I was foreign. I mean, I had so little to do. So when they wrote me in, they discovered there was an accent and they sort of made me Polish. But until then, they'd have me for English. So it sort of went from there. Then, depending on the script writers and then directors, I had a little more to do or a little less to do. As to what the story required. It was a very, very happy time, but it was a bit like a hobby because I didn't really have to do very much. I just had to be with this Lancelot and sort of be as charming as possible to all the people who came in and out of the series and didn't have, well, they probably knew everybody, but the main actors obviously were very busy and couldn't sort of look after them, so I think I was, I learned to do the crossword and things like that with people. Just very nice. Didn't take up knickers, but I got a retainer, so to speak, for the ones that I weren't in. I mean, when the contract for the next series was signed, it had a clause in it which would say that I would be paid so much per episode, or it would vary a bit according to how much I had to do in it. And the ones that was not required, or I would have a set fee.
Did it make much difference when cast changed over the years to some of the running of the series?
As far as I was concerned, it really didn't. I mean, it was Anthony Valentine and Patrick Moore sort of overlapped anyway, so and they were both very funny, so whoever was there was funny. My boss, of course, changed several times, but basically they were just being paternal in the very nicest way, and they all were, so I can't sort of really distinguish between liking someone better or preferring to work with someone more, or anything like that.
One of the best hunters, who was the boss of Callan, was of course played by William Squire, and this is William Squire talking about his role of hunter.
There was a lot of work went on between the first read-through and the final production, which wasn't just the director, a lot of rethinking went on between the characters. And that's one of the reasons, I think, why Callan was so successful, because it was always very well cast by people who knew they were, in most cases anyway, people who knew they were around and could make a contribution other than just performing. I'm going to be a bit delicate about this, because I don't want to say we were rewriting all the time. But, there were many, many points between all of us, and particularly Teddy and myself, when we got an instinct between each other, and we knew what was a more fitting way of either saying or doing it. That was the value. They didn't stint on the way they cast, and for those days certainly it was breaking new sort of ground. Really, this very hard, factual series. I mean, nobody likes to admit, and they've become more and more evident now. Nobody likes to admit that certain sections, government sections, exist. I mean, they're really hard. And I don't mean that we were meant to be an assassination bureau, of course not. But there are such hard departments. There's no question about that in every country in the world. I was going to say every Western country, practically every country. There is and it is ridiculous. I mean, I'm in a play at the moment out at Windsor called Pack of Lies, which is based on a notorious spy case. So notorious, you wouldn't remember it. It would have happened in 1960. But they were just people living in a suburb in Ruislip, up the street. Everybody knew them. They were chums of everybody's. They were delightful people. People thought they were Canadians and that sort of thing. And they had the biggest little spy factory you would imagine in that house. But the idea of the ruthlessness of this world, as I say, it's quite crazy. It costs so much money, and everybody knows practically everything anyway without trying to find it out. I mean, some of these secrets concerning the building of Concorde, of course, which that's why they could remember the one they called the Russian one Concorde, Steve, because everything had been pinched from the Concorde plans. I mean, that's what the real spying game is about. But you can read about it in aerographic magazines anyway all the time. But there are these sections which operate without any admission by any government, and there's no question about that. And what we worked at, I don't know if it was ever discussed with Teddy and me and others, but the awfulness about being in that section was that there was no way out. They had the drop on all of us in some way or another, from Hunter or above, from Hunter, and I forget who was above Hunter. There was another Bishop. From they were all. I mean, that there was something on. They all had something on them. I mean, there was only one way out, and that was a bullet. So that what we did with Teddy, and I did with Teddy, I don't know. I never saw any other hunters, so I can't. Thank God. Thank God I didn't, because I wouldn't have wanted to, because they were all bloody good actors. I knew them. My task as the actor performer of it was to goad Callan into efficiency. I didn't care how far he went, how angry he got, how cross he got, how violent he got. I didn't mind, because I knew there was that's the only way I could. That's the way I ran him, and it was like running a sort of dangerous animal, and you let him have his will, because you knew that there's nothing he could do except kill himself. There's no way out at all. That's how the thing was run so efficiently, really, because it was just that or nothing, and that's how we thought of. I don't think we ever spoke about it really, but that's how we used to. But people would say to me, "God, you're bloody hard on that man, Callan." I'm a very gentle soul, of course, and people say, "I don't know how." And my sisters, I've got many. They used to be horrified when I had to go down to Wales, how hard I was on Callan. I never told them, but I mean that was the purpose of being hunter, make him work. That was the entire thing.
And who could forget the torturer extreme, the sinister Clifford Rose, who played Snell, the man who seemed to have a chemical answer to any form of interrogation. Truly terrifying role, I have to say. He scared the living daylights out of me, Clifford Rose did. He was a very nice man in reality, and here he is talking about Snell.
From what I remember, I would say that not much was changed, because I think from what I remember, they were very well written. I mean, that is one of the things I remember about them. I can't remember if all the scripts were by James Mitchell, but certainly most of them, I think, were. And they all seem to be very kind of tightly written, and you couldn't really veer away from it because it was so good. I mean, if you altered it, it would be for the worse. Because often, as you know, in television scripts, you want to change words or even change whole things, and there's often a lot of rewriting. I mean, sometimes the whole things are rewritten. But I don't think that happened, certainly at the stage that we got to when we came to rehearse it. If there'd been rewriting, it'd been done before we got to rehearsal. And I don't think there was any rewriting in rehearsal, really, that I was aware of. And we just played it as it was written. And it seemed to be fine. I don't think there was any kind of problems over that at all.
Did you put any of your own interpretation into the role of Snell?
I suppose one did, yes. I mean, the two things that I remember, when I first came to do it, as I say, I thought it was a one-off part. In other words, he was just a character in a play, a television play, as far as I was concerned. And I didn't really envisage him having any kind of further life in it. And I did suggest, I remember this, because if I think was not written, I did suggest that he should be a kind of a rather smooth establishment character, and that he should have an old Etonian tie. In other words, he should be an old Etonian, which they liked that idea. We used that. And the other thing that I suggested was the glasses, because it seemed to me that it was nice to make him a kind of, in a sense, sort of a boffin as well. that he was a man who was not kind of... He was only involved in a kind of, in a sort of cerebral sense with what was going on. That he was not a kind of... he was not a heavy in the ordinary sense of the word. He was not a thug or anything like that. Although he did terrible things with drugs and all that sort of... That was his area. And I just saw the glasses, and I thought the idea of having slight tinted glasses was quite a nice idea, which they liked. And so we did that. But those are the two suggestions I made, were the huge with overtaken and they had these sort of slightly tinted kind of glasses. We ran into a problem on the film later on, because when we came to make the film, which was much, much later, Peter Egan, who was playing Mears, I think, in the film, had tinted glasses. And I said, now, can I have my tinted glasses? And they said, oh, we're all right now. Because Mears had already gotten them. So I can't remember what we did then. I think I just had ordinary glasses. But they weren't, I know they weren't tinted.
Another hunter was Derek Bond, and he came to a sticky end, I seem to recall, as well. He's a hunter who I think was killed in the end. And this is Derek explaining there again how his role as hunter differed from William Squire's role as hunter.
The time we were recording it, I mean, we didn't know how it was going to be a success at all. In fact, we didn't have we were quite happy with it, because I got on extremely well with it at Woodward, and we had a lot of fun doing it. I mean, we got a nice little edge between the two of us, and it was fun doing. The most difficult thing about Hunter is that it doesn't matter who's playing that character. He sets up the scene. So you also have about 15 names in the first 10 minutes, and telling which is difficult studying one thing or another. And it's slightly tedious in a sense that you've got to sort of set the story up. And that's always difficult. I mean, I think it's become better in television recently. But the way we took the curse off that was the antagonism we got between the two of us, a sort of friendly antagonism, so that all this exchange of information was over the sort of dislike of him for me and my sort of contempt for him.
Did you have much say in sort of individual episodes in the role, or did you just have to do it as the script?
No, I mean, one of the problems was that, of course, like all these series, you don't get the main author writing every episode. He is just there as sort of long-term story editor. They farm them out, and of course, quite a lot of the people who had come up with a good idea, or maybe handed a storyline and then wrote a script, it wasn't their fault, but they weren't necessarily aware of the little shades of difference we'd put into the characters and the relations between the two characters, the three characters, four characters, I mean, really. And the result was that some of the scripts, there were things where, Ted would say, no way could I say that to Hunter, or I would say, well, for God's sake, I couldn't say that. It's just little things, but on the whole, people were very sort of understanding, and we did have, because Ted's a strong character, and between us we did have quite a little bit of say not over the main thread of the story, but over our characters, maintaining the continuity of our characters. Over that we did get changes made in the script.
This would come in rehearsal time.
Well, it was very often the very first reading. We just recorded one the night before, and we would dish out with another script. We thought, Christ. I mean, there wasn't often as bad as all that, but sometimes we did really reel back in horror, being slightly tired. And then we would talk to the director about it. And the directors, again, of course, weren't. They were individuals. I mean, one or two of them did more than one episode, certainly, but they were intelligent people and got the point. And we never had any problems that way, really. But we did have, there's no question about it, we did have to make changes in that.
Did you actually meet the writers?
James Mitchell, yes. The other end, right? The writers were always present at the reading. And there was always always a bit of a problem. It's difficult because we didn't want to appear as though we were arrogant actors who let the whole thing go to our heads. It couldn't have done then because it hadn't been seen by the public. We didn't know whether they were really good or not. Most of us were sort of, like myself, have been at it a long time and had a lot of experience. But you don't want to hurt people's feelings and sort of say that's a bloody awful script. Some of them were. Some were extremely good. Some weren't so hot. And when they weren't so hot, then it was up to us to do our best to make them believable, make them good. So, in a way, I think particularly Edward contributed a hell of a lot, really. Well, all the four of us did, the regulars did contribute quite a lot.
And probably the other, apart from Russell Hunter, the other extremely well-known actor in the series who played in so many episodes was Anthony Valentine, playing Toby Mears, the charming, upper-crust, sophisticated killer who was at such a contrast to David Callan, who was really down-to-earth as an ex-criminal. And this is Anthony Valentine talking about that role.
Well, I mean, what may have come to light already is that James Mitchell had written for each character a dossier of their previous history before that moment in time, so to speak. And that dossier was remarkably helpful. I mean, it's not often that as an actor you're given something like that about a fictional character. One usually has to invent a background that makes sense in the context of the moment in time in which you start playing it. And that was absolutely marvellous, because, I mean, it really was like being handed a ready-made character that one scarcely had to think about. So that was very helpful.
How would you describe the character of Toby?
Well, it changed radically from the first episode and subsequently throughout the series. I mean, one of the things about being an actor in the series is that whatever character you play always tends to develop, sometimes in spite of the actor, sometimes because of the actor. I mean, I've always thought that the very best kind of writing is obviously where, I'm talking about in a series context now, where a writer has started off, obviously, with, hopefully, a tremendous structure which is honed and polished and is regarded as being worthy of doing. And then in the context of a series, the actors start working on it, and each actor is going to bring something of his own to it, in the same way that if you ask 6 different people to paint St. Paul's, they'd all come up with their own version of what St. Paul's look like to them. And I think it's very much the same with actors playing a particular part. The part itself may be 2-dimensional, but an actor is going to make it 3-dimensional. Now, whether that extra dimension is good or bad, to a certain extent depends upon luck. You know, the way things work is that the writer writes it, the director, if you like, interprets it, and then the actor ought to bring to it what the director and the writer had going in the first instance. Sometimes actors bring more to it, and when they do, if they do, what makes a series so valid is that the writer ought to be able to take advantage of that and say, he's doing things which I hadn't thought of, but they're very good, and they add layers and a kind of depth which I hadn't seen, but now I can use that in writing the subsequent episodes. But in the case of Mears, I think if I remember rightly, the first episode, excuse me, Mears was almost a psychopath. I mean, he was absolutely on the verge of waiting for the 2 gentlemen to come with a coat with long sleeves and take him away somewhere. And it was generally agreed by the producer and by the writer, and certainly by the director, that if Mears as a character was going to have any development, they'd better calm him down pretty quickly, because he was so unstable as a character in that particular episode that he would have been a hazard to any organization, let alone the security service. He was on the verge of almost becoming a kind of mass killer, and that he was so fragile and so volatile that they'd have to take him away and calm him down in some way. So what actually happened was that in the development of the writing, Mears became a lot cooler, a lot calmer, and developed some aspects of self-control. And then throughout the development of all the series that were done, he developed a kind of intimacy in his relationship with Callan, because as I'm sure you're aware at the beginning, his attitude to Callan was very much players and gentlemen. You know, Mears was of the gentleman class, and Callan was a player, the working class, and not very appetizing on any level. And Mears constantly took the piss out of him and constantly patronized him. And gradually throughout the series, there was a kind of respect that was developed by both of them, because I think Callan detested all those public school characteristics in Mears, particularly the nasty ones. And Mears' attitude to Callan changed in as much as, although he still always considered him to be working class, that at least he was a man who could do the job. So that was a kind of development in that.
Mears and Callan really became quite chummy in a
Yes, I can't remember when it was, but on one of the episodes they started calling each other by first name, and that to kind of demarcation. Yes, they became very close, and I mean, presumably had that kind of a bond, which people in extreme circumstances sometimes forge almost in spite of themselves, that their dependence upon each other was so great that they had to be a lot closer than they would necessarily admit to themselves.
Did the style of the programme change much when Terence Feely left as producer and commercial content took over?
That's almost an unanswerable question. I think it's unanswerable because if a programme does change in its style, I don't think it's ever possible to pin that on one particular person, or indeed on one particular facet of the production. I think things tend to alter in a much more generalised way. I was not aware that the programme significantly altered because Terence Feely wasn't with it anymore. I think that what we all felt about Canon at the time that we were doing it is we were always desperate, perhaps is a slightly exaggerated word, but all of us were deeply concerned, certainly in the best possible way, that it should be as good as it could possibly be, because we all felt, without exception, that what we had on paper, the scripts that came to us, were certainly some of the best television writing that we'd ever personally known. And I think that as an actor, when you're dealing with that, it's a bit like handling an important piece of china. You're not too careful, perhaps, about what you do with a cheap mug from a chain store. But if somebody hands you something and says, "This is me," then you tend to treat it rather seriously. And we always wanted it to be absolutely superb because we believed that the product was marvellous. And of course, it's a great, I suppose it's a hang-up that all actors have, that if you are handed anything that you believe is worthy, there's a tremendous pressure and a tremendous sense of responsibility on you to give it its full worth, to be as good as you should be, because the product deserves it.
Of course, behind the scenes, loads of people worked on Callan on different scripts at different times. I'm going to start with Terence Feely, who was there at the very beginning in the first series and was the associate producer. This is him talking about how Callan started and his role in Callan.
I was story editing Armchair Theatre for what was then ABC Television and which is now Thames Television. And one day, this tall Geordie with the thickest glasses I've ever seen walked into my office with what was obviously a script which had been around for some time. It was one, they get that dog-eared look. I don't know if you know it.
Yes.
And he told me later that he'd been trying to flog this thing for 4 years. It was called a Magnum for Schneider. And I said, okay, well, I'll read it. And I read it and absolutely loved it. But I said, there's more than just an armchair theatre in this. There's a series in it. Would you be prepared to let me write a presentation and inject a couple more characters? And I promise you, I'll sell it to Brian Tesler and Lloyd Shirley and Leonard White as a series. And Jimmy said, oh yeah, great. Yes, oh man, yeah, I'm off for that. So that's what I did. And we got the series. And the first series was, it was very Callan-esque, the whole story really. Because on the first series, it was created by James Mitchell and Terence Feely. On the second series, it was created by James Mitchell and Terence Feely, and Terence Feely was associate editor. I then went to Paramount Films, and the minute I went to Paramount Films, my credit disappeared. This is showbiz. It really is. You've just got to watch your back. And I thought, oh, the hell with it. I'm not going to fight about that. But when Jimmy and I were doing them together, they really sang. They were beautiful. You should have seen those black and white ones. But I don't think that James ever really forgave me for kind of deserting it or him or whatever. We lost contact, not through any fault of mine. I was the best man at his wedding. But it was as if he expected a rebuff or a snub because I'd gone on to movies and therefore I wouldn't want to know him. Nothing would have been further than the truth. I'm not like that. But because he expected it, he created it. You know, in other words, when we met, he was very kind of stiff and not the old Jimmy at all. So, however, as I say, that's the genesis of it. We did the first series. I had tremendous faith in it. So had Jimmy. The powers that be did not have so much, and they did this market research to the extent that they actually used tape recorders to interview people. And we, the production people, actually heard what people were saying. It was really interesting. There were women saying, "Well, I don't really like the violence in it," and we absolutely know it was the violence in it that they did like, because it was controlled violence. It was sexy violence in a way, because it was always Edward Woodward keeping himself reined in, like a volcano with the lid clamped on, and then exploding. And women found that exciting, although they would not at first admit it. But when we did the second series and did another market survey, we found that was what was turning them on.
And another well-known writer is Trevor Preston, who wrote several episodes, and here he is talking about his episodes.
It starts off, when I went into television, I was a researcher in an arts programme called Tempo, and Reginald Collin produced that. Reggie then moved up into the drama department, and I, in the meantime, went across to the children's drama department and started writing the children. And then Reggie started to produce Callan and said to me, would I like to have a go at one? And I thought, why not? I had a go at one, it worked all right. And that's the way it started, really. It's pure luck. Actually having a contact with them, became a producer.
So we do all the guidelines.
Well, you're talked to. I mean, obviously, there was a thing called, I've still got one actually, Red File Callan. I don't think you've seen this at all.
What's this?
This was a very professional
was that the
publicity handout which came in an envelope. And it was terrific because it gave you the whole background of Callan, reports from his officers. But it was all done as it might be done from the army when a man gets discharged psychologically unsound and what have you. And what this was for, obviously, was to give to journalists. But that was a good indication. And also you were briefed both by the producer and by the script editor, like you are in any... and then you have to produce an idea, short idea, 2 pages. They either like it or don't like it. And you're on to that.
Had you seen the episodes before that?
Oh, yes. I mean, Callan, when I went to work on Callan, I think it had gone through one series. And it was the top show. I mean, without any doubt. It was. There were 2 great shows of that period, in my opinion, on independent television. One was Callan and one was the Marker episode, Public and Light. It was an mixture of things.
How much control was it over what you actually got?
Well, as in all episodic television, the controls basically are an agreement between the producer, the script editor and yourself about what you write, what needs cutting, what has to be censored, too much violence, overt sex, bad language, all of these things have to be considered. So when you write episodic television, which I've done most of my working life, you've got to accept the parameters around it. But inside that, I think we were given quite a lot of freedom to do different sorts of ideas. I always used to try and find an idea that interested me, and build an episode around it. I think we were given pretty good freedoms, really.
How familiar were you with the characters when you came?
Well, I was pretty familiar only by looking at them on the television, like everybody else. I don't think I've missed an episode. I thought it was a terrific show. But they did, right through, undergo delicate changes. The relationship between Lonely and Callan, the different hunters, the different reactions with Toby Mears and then the other guy. So, in fact, the nice thing about the series was it kept reasonably fresh in that. I mean,
your characterisation differed quite a lot to Jason Mitchell's.
Yeah.
And generally yours were more, say, comic.
Yes. Yes. I saw Callan as a man of 2 sides. And I think gradually, you've got to remember that really Callan emerged from a novel that Jimmy wrote, Magnum for Schneider, where he was just a killer, really, a hired killer. I thought there was, and indeed it worked out, there was much more depth in Callan. So one gave him relationships with people, changed those relationships. I wouldn't say mine were comic, but I always slightly had tongue-in-cheek. I think we sort of, people like Callan, vehicles of the establishment, you've got to stick your tongue in your cheek, frankly.
Robert Banks Stewart, the man you probably know better for making things like Bergerac and Shoestring, was also a writer, and here he is talking about his work.
This was, Townsville and I were joint story editors. He was across the corridor in his office, and I was across the corridor in mine, and we each had half of the annual output of Armchair Theatre. He had his writers, I had mine. He had various people whose names I can't remember, but I can remember that I had, Robert Muller, Donald Churchill, John Mortimer, and I can't remember, all these people were writing plays for Armchair Theatre at that time. So then, around about that time, Magnum for Schneider was made as a one-off Armchair Theatre, as you know, with Leonard White, who was then the producer of Armchair Theatre, following Sidney Newman. Leonard was producer of that. Terence was the story editor on that one with James Mitchell. And at that point, I came to the end of my contract on Armchair Theatre, and I was asked, because it is always understood that I was a writer as well as a script editor, which, indeed Terence really is. And they said, well, we've got this, we want to do the spin-off from Magnum Schneider. Would you be interested in writing a couple of scripts, because Jimmy can't manage all 6? So I said, well, that's great. And Terence Feely and James Mitchell and me went to lunch in Verrey's in Regent Street. And we sat there and we talked the whole thing through. I mean, it was Jimmy's idea. It was Jimmy's play being made into a series. So we were just talking about generalities, really, because the characters we set. Callan was there, Lonely was there, Hunter was there. I think Hunter was in Magnum for Schneider, not totally certain about that. Anyhow, the upshot was, I went away and drummed up 2 stories. Jimmy got on. Jimmy had a great facility. You've interviewed him. Well, he had a great facility for just paddling along on his own, which is often what happens. I mean, the writer who conceives the idea can do it much more easily than somebody outside of it. But I loved the play, and I thought it was great, and I was very pleased to be asked to do it. So that's how I came to write People Discolored with Time, retitled Goodbye Nobby Clark. I know that Goodbye Nobby Clark was my title as well, so somebody must have said to me, not very keen on this title. So what happened was they made that, and Lloyd Shirley decided that Goodbye Nobby Clark was a very good kind of, you could call it a stiffener. I don't know why, but I came to somehow put more into that about Callan and his background, which we hadn't totally defined. And so when I had written the script, I was terribly pleased when Lloyd said, listen, when they made it, and Lloyd said, look, I think we're going to put this in number 2 because it's going to give the series a lot of character. Also, I've had a bit of fun with the Anthony Valentine character. And, so then I wrote that second one, called All Spies Are Alike, was the first title. Seems I always get it wrong first time. And then that was retitled Nice People Die in Bed. I didn't realise until you told me that it hadn't gone out as one of the openings, the opening 6, because I always thought Jimmy wrote 4 and I wrote 2, and I can't even remember why it didn't go out in the first 6. But anyway, I don't think actually, to be quite honest, although I met James Mitchell once or twice, I don't really know him very well. And I have great respect for him, but I think he was a bit miffed, actually, that he used my Goodbye Nobby Clark as a second script.
And let's also hear from Ray Jenkins about his work.
Sometimes, you see, the process is, if you sign on for a series, what you contribute is part what you want to publish and part what you inherit. And you inherit not just characters and assumptions about how stories are going to be made, but in fact a very highly developed production unit who have needs which are sometimes only about what you want, maybe casting, maybe keeping somebody, maybe getting rid of somebody, and so on. So sometimes the alterations that take place have nothing to do with style or content. They're to do with production needs. And I just can't remember this time in history which way around it was. But my whole life as an active trade unionist in the guild work has been to in fact stop that kind of control. But we can't do anything about it, really.
Apparently there were, I don't know if you were aware, but disagreements on set between Michael Goodliffe and Edward Woodward. Apparently didn't get on very well, which had led to him being written out, to be paid off and some.
Good comment.
And he went on to do something for Grenada, and very successful.
See, there way. So you know about that, and I can't even remember that. Don't forget, first time round, writing for a new company, there's a fair old chance that I was far more nervous about that, and rather than asking questions, I'd probably just taken things on. But I'm sure it must have been explained to me at one point why.
Was there much pre-planning on education?
Well, that's a director's. I would write something very specific, hoping that they would be able to find something for it. Of course, sometimes you don't find a house with a leaning gable which somebody can hang from. Of course you don't. But I think it's their job to find it. But they say, Ray, it's got to be within 20 yards of Teddington, to get a film crew. If it's totally impossible, and therefore fundamentally interferes with the script, then I think directors ring you up. I mean, Peter Duguid would, Jim Goddard would, and they would. Some directors, they think it's their script then, and who are you? You've been paid, get off. So writers then feel very, very anxious about being there. The other problem is if you're a successful writer, you're writing all the time. You cannot spend 4 days standing around, very boring, up to your knees in mud, guarding your golden lines. So it has to be a compromise.
Did you ever write with director in mind?
No.
Did you ever write with any actor in mind?
No.
You had no.
Very, very, very seldom have I ever done that. I've only done it twice, actually, and the actors I wrote for weren't used. I once promised a play to John Hurt and Mary Wimbush, and that number.
You never were you ever asked suggestions to come?
Yes. Where, even at that point, which is really quite early in my career, I've been lucky people have been genuine about major casting, not minor. They would ring up and say, we're thinking of so-and-so and so-and-so. What do you feel? And then I didn't know who, so I can't remember that. Wouldn't face it so I could run away and look at the books. But minor casting, no. There's another question you should have asked, of course, the relationship between James's original style and anybody who contributes to the series. No, it's very, very interesting, isn't it? On the one hand, a guy invents a character and writes in a certain way. Now, do we imitate that because of the series, because that's canon? Or does the series itself, because it gets going and becomes its own life, it's not Callan anymore, it's Edward Woodward. Does he give something then to the part that overcomes any kind of... Obviously, you're not going to get a terribly florid style being accepted because it just doesn't work like that. One would tend to use that kind of clipped, rather sort of restrained style. But yeah, I think I would have read James's novels and writes roughly in the way he did.
Who can forget the directors, of course, and Mike Vardy, who was a good friend to Kaleidoscope over the years, directed quite a few brilliant episodes, and here is Mike talking about directing Callan.
The only thing you have to do is to weld somebody new into the team, because by that time they do it standing on their ear half asleep, because have done it then for so long. And it was the same with Patrick Moore when he came in. He was a different character, let alone, I suppose the Hunters were really, totally different to Tony. And so, again, that produced problems in as much as I think subconsciously the writers were still writing for Mears and not for Cross, which, again, required a lot of sort of adjustment, shall we say. Now, as I remember this was Liz's. I mean, she'd spent, well, all these episodes so far flitting in and out, saying 2 lines and going again. And I don't know whose idea it was to actually build an episode round her. She was a very, very sweet girl, and everybody was very fond of her. And I think she decided to give her a big chance. Has the series changed since Black and White? Oh, was this the first colour series? Well, and it was now top of the ratings by this time, was it? Well, yes. The colour thing, in the early days anyway, used to take forever. The cameras used to take forever to set up. All these engineers used to disappear into darkened rooms and work for anything up to 2 hours getting it right. And the cameras used to drift off colour quite often and quite frequently, so that we had to stop while they then readjusted them. But I have to say that as it was quite a sweeping change, that the aggravation caused was not as much as you might think. I mean, the engineers were pretty good. It was just the time that it took to do everything that was. But in that, there is no other sense that it changed. I think it was then into quite, apart from changing the odd running character, it was in a well-run groove by then. Graham Crowden as the Grover.
Yeah,
Well,
so we were wondering how you cast her and why Graham Crowden?
Well, he was obviously a struck-off doctor with strong homosexual tendencies. It was really a case of I can't put it any higher than a normal casting sort of thing that we discussed probably. And I'm speaking purely off the top of my head, sort of giving you what we normally do. We probably discussed maybe half a dozen actors who we thought possible. And Graham seen with an Edinburgh lilt, in addition to what was written, seemed sort of to be the best that was available.
And I'm going to finish this section by talking to 2 producers. The first one is Reginald Collin, a man who won BAFTAs for producing Callan and was known for doing those brilliant early episodes. Here he is talking about how he saw Callan and his proudest achievements on the series.
One of the sets which they used for Callan's flat in the 3rd series, or your 2nd series, was that actually raised, which you can remember? Because there's a set which looks as though it's been raised, because a lot of the camera shots are sort of shot.
And then the camera is standard television technique, so it's quite possible to put up on a raster.
Why would that be done?
Well, because it enabled you to get lower camera angles.
And they say to rip the whole set on it.
So you shove the whole set on. That's a standard technique. I mean, it's or say to be quick to say, it was a standard technique. For all I know, with lightweight, don't remember these are big studio cameras. You see. When you've got lightweight cameras, you can do all sorts of things that you can't do. I mean, you can run with now. I mean, to lift those things took 3 men.
There's many a forklift truck on the technical inquiry.
Yes, that's another standard. We find on most of the shows that I do, there's also something called a cherry picker, because that's another thing that I was always using.
What a strange stick that you wanted to know what it was.
Howard McCann? Yeah, it's a creeper. It's a creeper.
Creeper?
Yeah.
A creeper is a thing that looks like a rather large skateboard. See, cameramen are, as I said earlier, very ingenious. And somewhere in the history of time, a cameraman took his camera off and put it on a bit of plywood that was on 4 little wheels about that high on the floor. So it was called a creeper because that's precisely what it did. It crept along. Another technique we used to use in the old days was to use periscope to get the language shots. Or you shove it up on a rostrum, as in this case. I mean, those are things one does.
Were the cameras you were using, were they some turret things and four lenses on it?
I can't remember when the changeover came.
So another thing else there is the the turret lens. Could you actually fit zooms to them? So
no,
there were no zooms at all.
No.
Some of the technical advanced has one camera with a zoom lens.
Yes.
Would that be the different from, or what? I mean, did you have?
As I recall it, you could put a zoom on a turret lens, but you couldn't swing it. In other words, you either used it as 4 lenses that you swung, or you could stick a zoom on, but you then couldn't swing it because it was too big and heavy and all that.
But the color cameras presumably had sort of just one.
Color cameras, as I recall again, were all zoom. Zoom camera was good in many ways, but in some ways, cameras stopped moving. The zoom lens made a difference to camera work. In the early days, if you watched a studio drama production, the cameras would whiz around the floor, being pushed and pulled, and you'd go sideways, you'd crab, and you'd dolly in, pull out, and you'd go up on the thing. Zoom lenses tended to stop all that, because all you did was to zoom in or zoom out, and rarely crab with a camera, because you've got the vibrating on the phone.
And the other producer-director you're going to hear from now is Sean O'Riordan. Now, he came along and produced Wet Job, which was an ATV reboot, a one-off play in 1981 when David Callan thought that he'd escaped from the world of espionage and was dragged back in. And this is Sean O'Riordan talking about how he reimagined Callan in 1981.
And anyway, I liked him very much. And as you can see, the majority of his writing, I mean, that scene between Lonely and Callan, with the reading of the letter, and that is a scene that's terribly, terribly high-class entertainment writing for my money. It's the best sort of text you ever expect or hope to get in this kind of work. It really is. In sort of modern telly pulling, entertainment pulling, I don't think I think he's superb. Angela Brown wasn't my best casting for the woman, although I think she's very good in it. It is Angela, isn't it? Angela Brown. I found somebody else, actually, and had a battle with Maureen Risco, who was a casting director about it. And by the time it was too late, I lost the other girl. But I thought she did well. Angela Brown in this.
And Hugh Walters as Hunter.
That I never had any doubt about in my mind. I just read that book and I went, he was in my mind, he was straight there. I didn't see anybody else. I asked him to come in and would he play the part? He said yes, and that was it.
Did you work with him before?
Yes, but only, you know what he usually does? He's usually the comic postman or bus conductor, or he plays in the Carry On films. He was always sort of, that odd little face of his would pop up dressed as a gas man, a postman, or any one of those. And this was really the meatiest part I think he'd ever had, and I think he played it much, much. I've been seeing him again has been a pleasure, because he so did what I wanted him to do, which was to be that effete generalist. One of the joys of doing all those scenes, you won't have, I doubt whether it would sort of make any effect on you, but it is possible doing Mitchell's text, to get a whole series of very exciting close-ups and profiles. In the scene with Hunter, for instance, there were some smashing things that were possible. But the other thing that James Mitchell's writing allows you to do is this, what you've just seen here, where the camera there was the gun scene. So the camera comes off and you've got story going with the camera dwelling on completely different things. And you're able to, for instance, the camera going down to the coins on the table, the hand joining the coins, the coin going to, and then going to the letter. You can follow his scenes allow you to shoot. I don't know why. I mean, when he saw Liz, the way he'd written the drinks from the meeting, you never saw Liz's face. She went down as she put the drinks down and the hands held. Something about James Mitchell and the way he writes his scenes that allows a director... He doesn't write stage directions. He writes scenes that have action in them rather than chat. There is a lot of chat, but he also has a lot of action with this one, for instance, the coins and the gun and the letter and the passing. His scenes have a lot of tactile action in them, which makes them very nice to shoot.
So that's brilliant, isn't it? That's a fantastic range of interviews already, but we're not going to be quite done there yet, because I'm also going to try and talk you through a few other bits and bobs. This is a really interesting piece. This is Edward Woodward with some other celebrities on the Erin Andrews show on the 27th of March 1969. And here he is talking about the Callan season that was just airing at the time.
Now, I've watched you, as I'm sure most of our audience, if not all of our audience, had in Callan. And I have been puzzled, as I suspect you as an actor have been puzzled about what kind of character Callan is. I think the reason for this sort of cult that's grown up a bit is the enigmatic quality of the gentleman. That's what fascinated me in playing the part. You've got these chips on his shoulder, right, left, and centre, but you never really know what the chips are. But now, presumably, you've come to terms with it. Oh, I come to terms with it. Yes, I've come to terms with it. Was it a problem for you as an actor coming to terms with the kind of understand because it's so real? No, I don't. Not really. I think you take a little chip that you have yourself, and you think, what would this little chip be like if there were not of these chips? And you imagine it, and it's what there. But I mean, did you just imagine it on the set, or did you take it home with you? And well, James Mitchell, who wrote the original character, and wrote all the series, wrote a very, very good character and a very, very clear man to follow. Do you think that the kind of picture that is portrayed in that series, the kind of part you play, bears any relationship to real life? Oh, I have no doubt about it at all. I mean, we know that men disappear all over the world, especially in Europe and South America. They constantly disappear. There are men constantly calling to disappear and men constantly dying. And I'm not talking about the spy. Oh, it's a spy. I don't be running off with other. No, I'm sure, perfectly. Do you think, Michael, and you have some experience in this area, that the kind of character, the kind of story, the kind of Callan story happens outside this theatre, outside our house? But yes, I'm not quite clear. Is Callan, because unfortunately, I mean, forgive me, I know you're Brightwater very well, but I have to. I haven't been to the theatre because I've been in and out of it. But everybody's raving about it. It's a wonderful theatre. But is the character supposed to be an assassin working for MI5 or at least, or we particularly the economy, did a gentleman rule when necessary? Certainly becomes an assassin for an unnamed group within a organization, presumably MI5, MI6. But I don't honestly think that there is much assassination in either. Well, there is an MI6, we know that. But I can't really talk about the service anyway. But the sort of thing that one met up with. I mean, we did assassination courses of it, and one of the things that we were taught to kill with was the thing that you cut cheese with in the international store. Very good. He did. It's true. Nobody ever believes the damn thing I say, but two pieces of wood, the piece of piano wire in between. There were two very interesting gentlemen called Fairbanks and Sykes. I don't know whether they're still alive. Wow, no, not Douglas Bell, but Fairbanks and Sykes. They were both Shanghai police, and they taught a lot of the SOE boys. And one of the things, about Barbara's suggestions that what you should do to people when they were down on the floor, kick him in the, which was, Toga. They instilled in you the aggressive spirit. They were two fairly old people. At first, I was very young now, I thought they were. But one of the things they used was the machine gun. The other, of course, all weapons.
Yeah.
But I don't honestly think that MI5's don't employ that. We don't specifically that. MI7 might deploy. If there anything there that, you come up tell me that the CIA or the MPA or, that's not how they grew. No, they employed on job. They had brought people to do everything. Stop like that. Bear the piano and the truth. We're gonna leave it there for a moment. You do it like this. You got it. All right. What do you mean? When you get back, I did it with the meal. We're coming back here. We're coming back to meet in that they just been talking about Abby's television brother, Eric Sykes. And then we're going to have a sing-along. I hope, Edward, we can persuade you to lead it again. Possibly, yes. We'll work on it, but we'll feel that anyway.
Moving on slightly in terms of the years, if you like, into the more the colour series, there were other writers who worked for Callan, like Bill Craig and people like John Kershaw, Lloyd Shirley and George Markstein, and it's wonderful to be able to present some insights on these people as well. So let's start with Lloyd Shirley talking about being a producer, an executive producer for Callan.
Well, I was head of drama for ABC at the time, and we were doing a run of armchair theatre, which is a regular format for the then company, ABC Television. Before Thames was formed. And the producer of armchair theatre, an old friendly colleague called Leonard White, was brought in, getting a whole script for it, which is a little unusual because the more common occurrence with armchair theatre is that the scripts would be commissioned for television from writers, and you would start off with a story premise, a story intention, and that would be discussed, and the writer would be commissioned to take their idea into the form of a teleplay. And in this instance, it had been written, I believe, originally for the BBC. And I don't know if James would confirm that, but I think he probably would. And the BBC decided not to do it. His work was known to BBC, James Mitchell's work, that is. And he offered it to us to see if we might be interested. I read it, I think you read it at the time, George's story. And Leonard liked it, we all liked it, we decided to go forward with it. And that was the beginning of it. It was prepared for production as an armchair theatre, with the title of a Magnum for Schneider, which is what the teleplay's called. And from there on, it followed its usual process, the process that most armchair theatres went through, that a nominated director would, in conjunction with the story editor, the producer, myself, prepare the show for production. Elements of casting were discussed, rewriting if necessary. Sometimes shows are overlaid and have to be cut, and generally brought to a state where rehearsal would start, the show would be designed, and an armchair theatre production would be done.
So at what stage was the series designed upon?
Oh, I think immediately after the first recording, his memory serves me, that it seemed to us to have potential, that the casting of Edward Woodward had been a very happy decision, and of Russell as Loneworth, and the characters seemed to be very interesting, and that tends to be, putting it at its simplest, one of the major criteria for a series. That unless there's an interesting human being or human beings, plural, in the center of it, that there isn't much to go on. the human beings tend to be rather more important than the story area. How can I express it? Somebody might come along and say, wouldn't it be interesting to do a series about veterinary surgeons? Well, the answer is it might be and it might not be. But if you've got a given story and a given specific veterinary surgeon who is interesting, then the answer is probably yes. Human beings are more important than the story area always. Story area is important, but the man or woman, or individuals in the middle, the specific human beings, are the most compelling and necessary thing about all series. So they're hardest to do too, because that's where the writer requires art. That it's one thing to say a story about a veterinary surgeon would be interesting. It's another thing to create an interesting veterinary surgeon.
And here's John Kershaw, a man who seems to be remembered best for writing Rainbow nowadays, but he wrote some brilliant episodes of Callan as well.
I think what probably happened was that the structure of the series as a whole, the shape of the whole series, would not become apparent until the first 2 or 3 scripts. I mean, first of all, the whole thing was the brainchild of James Mitchell, and the original intention, I think, certainly on his part, was that it should all be written by James Mitchell. I found, personally, some difficulty in accepting his scripts as they came in, and I think that if he had had an intention about the shape of the series, it probably became slightly changed by us as we began to see that really he was simply delivering scripts without any thought about where it was going. I think the business about where it was going, where it went, you know, what dictates this sort of thing is often accident. I mean, for instance, if I remember rightly, the Hunter of the second series was Michael Goodliffe. The beginning, the first episode, the very beginning. Right, I remember we sat and talked about this for a very long time, Reggie and I, who would be the Hunter. And Derek Bond was a person we thought about. And then we thought he was perhaps the wrong image. We did want to get away from fantasy and romance and all that. And Michael Goodliffe was an extremely serious and very intelligent actor. And we eventually, and we approached several. There's another very big actor who lived in, I don't mean physically big, Scotsman, but he was big in the States, in Hollywood and that. I can't remember his name, sorry. We approached him, first of all. I mean, if he had done it, it would have been, you know, yet again a different series. Anyway, the thing was, Michael Goodliffe liked the concept. He liked the idea of, and it was partly because he had been a prisoner of war, and he had in the Japanese in Italy, not in Europe, but he'd had a very bad experience of war. He felt uncomfortable. He knew a good deal about the other side of horror that is imposed on people. And he was interested in wanting to get under the skin of that sort of feeling. And so he said yes, and he would have to come and do the series. After the first episode, he began to have some reservations. After the second episode, he began to have very, very serious reservations. He got himself into something that he didn't think he was happy about at all. And it clearly became quite apparent that he was not going to stay. I'll tell you a little story about his arrival on the first read-through. You know, normally speaking, the read-through, you know what a read-through is. Well, the others, I mean, Mears and Hunter and, Mears and Callan and Lonely, and they were the only real regulars. They knew what Callan was all about. They'd already done 6 episodes, so they were extremely blasé about it all. Michael Goodliffe sat there and read through the thing, and then started asking questions. Why is this happening? What is the motive for this? And so on. What exactly is the character of this person? And all the rest of it. And the other 3 got really fed up with it, because that was what Michael was like. He was extremely thorough, worrying away all the time. And I think it was partly their reaction, their unwillingness to put up with this sort of searching, questioning, because as far as they were concerned, they were there to do a job. And it was partly that, and partly his own. He was always filled with doubts. I remained a friend of his till the end of his life, and he was always ringing up whenever he did anything and saying, "Would I look at so and so on the box and see what I thought?" Because had he made a mistake, which is the wrong decision. Anyway, to cut a long story short, the thing was, we realised that he had to go, and so we had him shot, which he was quite happy about. And that was why he disappeared, and why eventually we brought David Bond in the episode I wrote, through the minefields across in East Germany.
Here's an interesting interview. This is Wojtek, a man who began as a designer who went on to be a director. And here is Wojtek talking about being a director on Callan.
Well, I think the atmosphere was extremely good because of Ted Woodward. I think Ted Woodward was an honestly professional person, very courteous and very punctual. And he's always at half an hour before everybody in the rest. So he's always going through his business. He knew his words before anybody else, and he's always being very polite to everybody, helpful. So he's quite an unusual person. Well, he was more unusual than some, but in fact he was very, very well prepared. And that made things much easier all around. I think they say the same in the States, where he's an enormously together person. And he didn't take liquid lectures and, write letters and lots of actors who do lots of work for series, which might be very boring for him. Anthony Valentine, introduced a sort of a different note into the not so much group of the actors, but in the story, because he was the ambitious bloke who tried to get Callan's place, and in a sense, this episode we produced we work on the subtext to a great extent. Valentine was just here. He actually made us aware of that, and there was, to some extent, I think producing that was to some extent unexpected. I thought it was quite obvious from the script, and we all agreed that it was obvious in the script. Not everybody who actually originally thought of the script was aware of that was very jealous person.
And the final set of interview quotes for tonight come from the man who created Callan himself, James Mitchell. This is James Mitchell talking about the origins of Callan, how Callan evolved, and why Callan was so important to him as a character that led to all sorts of spin-offs, newspaper articles, books, and in fact, even now, Big Finish doing audio plays, using Frank Skinner and other people like that in the roles now to replace people like Russell Hunter.
In those days, he used to live quite close to Teddington Studios, and he'd just finished the whole series of things. He'd come back to England, and he'd got a whole run of jobs, which he took one after the other, all very nice stuff too. And he was whacked, and he and his wife had arranged a holiday. He was then married to Venetia Woodward, and he really needed it. And the casting lady at Thames, which was then ABC, remember, kept ringing him up and saying, "I've got this part for you," and he kept saying no. And she rang his agent, and his agent said, "Maybe you better think about it." And he said, "No, I'm exhausted. I need a rest." And he was so tired, he got to bed, just had a very early summer, he got to bed and was asleep. And the casting lady at Thames actually went and delivered the script to the house. And Venetia got it and read it. And she went upstairs and shook him awake and said, "Read this. If you don't play it, you're crazy." And Teddy said he was up the rest of the night sort of thinking about it. He couldn't go wrong with Callan.
Who actually commissioned the script out, you say?
Whoever was head of series at that time must have done. Possibly Lloyd. But he'll tell you it. I assume that the men upstairs were thinking about it because it was the great spy time, in the 60s. But I didn't know until I was told that there'd been a massive phone call. As the closing credits were rolling, people were ringing up and saying, when are we going to see the next one, and all that. And that was the first intimation I had that the series is in the offing.
How does it feel to have other writers, well, particularly Wallace and Thurston's, using your characters?
It's never a perfect relationship. It can't be. I mean, I've done it a couple of times since. And it's a bit of a sweat, but you've got to live with it because nobody obviously can see the problems exactly as I see them. You can't sort of clone the thing. You just got to get on with it.
Different hunters have very different characters. And this one, the first one was your creation.
He was the most brutal and the most effective, I think, a lot. He was so wrong and he was right because he didn't look like an establishment figure at all. Remember, he looked like a very angry bullfrog. And yet he wore the establishment clothes and had the establishment accent, struck the establishment attitude superbly well. I thought he was a wilderness hunter. He died tragically very shortly after. On the stage in Canada, was in the Shakespeare. He was also a countryman of mine, in as much as we're both Geordies who both came from the Northeast. We discovered that halfway through the first series.
You did quite a few stories with sort of Israelis and Nazis and that thing. Is that particular interest of yours?
I've always been fascinated by Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service anyway, because it's so bloody good. Naturally, you take canals and so that. And after all, the war was there nearly 20 years ago. And the SS man on the loose or whatever was still very much a possibility. Not only that, but you could play him as a comparatively young man with all the vigor and danger that implies. And therefore, it was a good scene. All that in 50 minutes. I want you to bear this in mind. That is always the problem with this kind of thing. You cannot tell a novel in 50 minutes. The best you can hope for is a short story. But of course, if you're telling this kind of thing, you've got to tell a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. You can't leave it up in the air.
Didn't you ever think of writing a story extending over a number of episodes?
It might have done. It wasn't on because in those days, it wasn't on in the 90s. It is very much on because quite a lot of 50-minute series do a two-hour back-to-back, don't they? Yeah. Or, just do 100 minutes instead of 50 and 50. But in those days, it was believed to be the kiss of death. Unless you resolve it, people wouldn't look again next week. Because that was a serial, which was a different matter altogether.
So, the legacy of Callan lives on. If you want to hear a little bit more of these interviews, some of the extracts are on the Via Vision box set as extras, but the huge amount of them have never really been heard completely before because, as you probably have worked out, some of the technical quality of some of the recordings is very old and not very good. But we thought it was worthwhile playing some of those to you today because, let's face it, there's no other way you're going to hear things, is there? The whole beauty of Kaleidopod is that you get to hear things that you would never hear ever again. That's all for me from September, and I look forward to you joining me for the October, November and December ones, which will wrap up this year for us, our 35th anniversary year. It's been a pleasure to bring you the work of Anthony Goodman and Matthew Morgenstern, two pioneers of Callan. I hope that one day Matthew may indeed write the definitive book on Callan using some of these interviews. He certainly deserves it, And Anthony, we remember you kindly in our thoughts and prayers, and always will. You're a good friend to Kaleidoscope. For me, for another month, adieu. Bye.